Hola, bienvenidos a Naxos. Esto es música clásica. Hoy vamos a estar charlando con el compositor estadounidense Sean Hickey acerca de su nuevo álbum grabado bajo el sello Sono Luminus, en donde se presenta una gran obra para piano que se denomina Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind. Esta monumental obra para piano está basada en la novela de Yuval Noah Harari y está magníficamente interpretada por el pianista ruso Vladimir Rumiantsev. Este álbum ya está disponible en todas las plataformas de streaming y es fácilmente adquirible en amazon.com. Para este podcast tuve el placer y el privilegio de haber podido entrevistar en inglés al compositor Sean Hickey, y la primera pregunta que le hice fue el porqué de la selección del piano como instrumento para plasmar esta monumental obra, y esto fue lo que me dijo.
You know, when I first read the book Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari that inspired the piece, I mean, I was so absolutely blown away by the book and everything that I read, and it just blew my mind. And I knew almost right away, almost really from the first page, that I wanted to have some sort of musical response to this book. But it is so big and so unwieldy, and as you know, the subtitle of the book is A Brief History of Humankind, which is pretty big and pretty broad. And my initial idea, I mean, I didn't have any, real concrete musical ideas, but I wanted to potentially write something for orchestra, of which I've written a lot for orchestra over the years, as I think you know. And when it came down to it, I really sort of approached my piano here, and I kind of had this idea that as I started sketching out some of my very initial sketches of what was going to be in the book, I really kind of limited it to just a handful of things. At the time, it was six. It later became eight of different sort of signposts throughout human evolution, and maybe not just signposts, but things inspired by human evolution or history as we know them. Like one of the section titles is called Lascaux, and one of the sections is called Jericho, and we can talk about that too. But why the piano? I'm utterly intimidated by the instrument, even though I've been writing for it for almost 40 years, I think. I still cannot play the instrument all that well. I mean, I can get around it okay, but I find it very intimidating. But at some point, I had the idea that maybe this piece really begged to be for me, was a very, very different approach to the piano. Like I've said, I've written a lot for the instrument. This was going to be a piece that was bigger, broader, and as you may have seen from the notes, the piece, doesn't really start on the piano, but at the piano. And it really starts with the sostenuto pedal depressed, and the pianist is asked to literally breathe into the strings of the instrument with a single human breath. And then there's some knocking, and then there's some music that somehow emerges from it. And that to me is what I imagine music to have sounded like in prehistoric times. And once I kind of had that idea, the sort of keeping the idea that this piece could and should be for the piano became a big challenge for me, and one that I ended up doing. It took me a long time to write, but that's what you have today.
Esta gran obra para piano tiene varios movimientos o secciones, y estos son Prehistory, Lascaux, Fertile Crescent, Jericho, Mean Temperament, Double Helix, Confirmation Bias y Commonwealth. Ahora Sean Hickey nos habla acerca de cómo fue el proceso de plasmar la idea primaria en el libro de Harari y llevarla a la música, y esto fue lo que me dijo.
Yeah, I mean, so for me, it was really about, how do I make this a piece of music that is inspired by the book and not be something that departs from it. And the broad premise of Sapiens as a book is why our species, mine and yours, survived and anything else did not. I mean, we still inhabit this earth with animals and a lot of other creatures, but most of humanity, as we know it, has died out over the millennium, and yet we have survived, and our brains have grown and developed, and we have thrived. And then, the first big, sort of human revolution among Homo sapiens was the cognitive revolution, the growth of the brains, the ability to walk upright, and then to form groups, at first small groups, And then many millennium later, the agricultural revolution, the ability to grow food and to live together in larger groups and support one another by living in larger groups. And that's not something that had really happened before. Sapiens, for its first 98% of its millennia of its existence, have lived in small bands of families and hunter gatherers, and the ability to grow food was a big development. So much of what you hear throughout the piece and the different sections of the piece, prehistory, Lascaux, etc., are really kind of signposts on that larger road of human evolution. And you have some that are, I think, a little more liberal in that, let's say, Lascaux, for instance, really refers to what we feel, at least at the time, was the one of the earliest found expressions of art in the caves in France, right? And those particular paintings, we don't know how they were made or why they were made. Did someone have free time? Were they fleeing famine or terrible conditions or war? Did they, what was the reason for that? And we look at Lascaux, even though that there have been older dated cave paintings than Lascaux, it is, the best known one. Why did the artistic need or desire happen at that time? Was there anything beyond a need or desire to do it? Was it, were they trying to communicate something to us? And that to me was fascinating. And I really kind of structured a whole section and movement around that particular thing. So you have that as a really sort of a more particular thing. You have another movement called Fertile Crescent, which is the longest section of the piece. And that refers to the band that roughly went from the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt over to Eastern Anatolia, modern Turkey, in a big crescent shape throughout the Middle East, where most of the food, a large portion of the food, at least the agricultural resources in terms of grains, was first planted in that area that allowed for larger settlements to happen. One of those larger settlements is the name of another movement, Jericho. Jericho, like Babylon and Ur and a handful of other places, is among the oldest permanently inhabited places on Earth. And why there, and why, did it grow so much? And of course, it's well known in the sort of biblical Jericho is the place where Gabriel blew his horn and blew down the walls of the city. It was arguably the first city that had walls, protected walls, because there was a lot to protect in there. And I really wanted to, kind of compose a movement that is, in some ways, my response to the harshest invention in human history, and that is the wall. Something that keeps out others, and it's very deeply ingrained in our, at least American psyche right now, sadly. And yet it's a necessary thing. I'm surrounded by them. You're surrounded by them. We need them in many ways. It's a great invention. And that Jericho was, as a piece of a section of the piece, really kind of a way of demonstrating the concept of settlement, agriculture, and the invention of the wall.
Para poder realizar esta grabación, Sean Hickey tuvo que contar con un pianista de características especiales, y esto fue lo que John nos comenta acerca de cómo fue su trabajo con el fantástico pianista ruso Vladimir Rumyantsev, y esto fue lo que me dijo.
Vladimir Rumyantsev is a Russian-born, U.S.-based, New York-based pianist that I only met a couple of years ago. As I think you know, Philippe, I've worked with a great many brilliant pianists over the years, and Vladimir's ability and capacity and virtuosity, his capacity to retain tempi and information is unlike anyone I've ever had to work with. The recording process, which we did at the Sono Luminus studios, and it's released on Sono Luminus, as you know, was among the most enjoyable recording experiences I've ever had, probably the most enjoyable, because he made it so easy and they made it so easy, and it was just very relaxed. And the piece is anything but relaxed, as I think you know. But he just really approaches music with this incredible level of professionalism. The Sapiens was composed. I mean, it was started in early 2019, I believe. And when the pandemic happened in 2020, I set it aside for quite a while, really kind of adapting to the world of Zoom and hybrid work, and suddenly, for the first time in most of my life, not traveling anywhere and holed up at home and dealing with some personal family issues and things like that. I set the piece aside, and it wasn't until the end of 2020 and the beginning of 21 that I really sat down and finished it. And that part, really, the last four sections came rather fast. And the idea in 2021 was to try to do I had three pianists in three different continents that wanted to give the premiere. And the idea was to give a Zoom premiere in three different continents, maybe simultaneously or throughout the same day. But the thought of organizing it all and logistics and cameras and microphones and all of that, just while I'm here at home in New York, it just seemed like way too much. And I really just kind of put it aside until I was introduced to Vladimir, who was a was a doctoral student at the at the Mannes School of Music at the New School here in New York. I was introduced to him by a dear friend, Xiaoyin Wang, who is another brilliant pianist, records for Chandos and Naxos for many years, mm-hmm. and is a good friend of mine and commissioned a piece of mine called Cursive years ago. And she said, "You need to hear this guy. He is playing one of your movements of Sapiens, one of your sections of Sapiens." I said, "Really? Oh, that's great." And she sent me a couple of videos, and I was just utterly impressed by him. He was playing a piece called a section of the Sapiens called Confirmation Bias, which is very meaningful to me, which I like a lot. And I was just blown away, and I got to meet him, and we just hit it off very well. And he gave the complete premiere in New York at this time last year, February of 24, which was very successful. We're going to do it again at a big festival in Chicago in September. And then a week after we performed the premiere in New York, we went down to Virginia to record the whole thing. And as I said, it could not have gone better. I mean, Vladimir is an artist that is absolutely on the beginning of incredibly great things, incredibly virtuosic, but patient and sensitive. And he's, very much open to all kinds of musical ideas and chamber music. Right now, he happens to be on tour with the Twyla Tharp Dance Company, performing Beethoven's Diabelli variations, complete on stage every night for something like 30 or 40 concerts. So, I mean, he has virtuosity to burn, and just a lovely guy. So you're going to hear a lot more from him in the coming years.
Un fuerte agradecimiento a Sean Hickey por la entrevista concedida, y para más información acerca de esta y otras grabaciones los invito a consultar nuestro sitio web www.naxosenespañol.com. No nos dejen de seguir por nuestras redes sociales. Soy Philip Adelfan y los espero en otro podcast de Naxos. Esto es Música Clásica. Chao.